This is Ken Forster, Executive Director at Momenta. Welcome to our Digital Industry Leadership Podcast, produced by, for, and about digital industry leaders. In this series of conversations, we capture insights from the best and brightest minds in digital industry. They're executives, entrepreneurs, advisors, and other thought leaders. What they have in common is, like our team at Momenta, they are deep industry practitioners. We hope you find these podcasts informative. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Good day and welcome to edition 139 of our Digital Industry Leadership Series. Today, it is truly a great pleasure to welcome Dr. Flavio Bonomi, the founder and former CEO and CTO of Nebbiolo Technologies, a Silicon Valley startup delivering the first complete fog/edge computing software platform for the industrial automation market. Dr. Bonomi is a technology expert and visionary with experience that spans from low-level devices and silicon to the broad level of networking and computer systems. He spent 14 years at Cisco Systems leading advanced R&D as a Cisco Fellow. While there, he also literally coined the term fog computing. Prior to Cisco, Flavio worked at several Bay Area startups and was at AT&T Bell Labs, where he was a distinguished member of the technical staff. He received a Ph.D. in electrical engineering from Cornell University, as well as a Bachelor of Science in electrical engineering from the University of Pavia, Italy. A consummate learner, he has published over 100 papers in technical journals and conference proceedings, and is co-inventor on, I'm not kidding here, 60 plus U.S. and international patents. Flavio, welcome to our Digital Industry Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure to be with you on these topics that I am very passionate about.
Oh, yes. Passion clearly defines you, doesn't it, Flavio? Especially when it comes to fog computing, which will really be the clear topic today. So I always like to start with one's digital industry journey. What would you consider to be the red thread of your digital leadership journey?
I think is the IT-OT convergence, a sentence that is used a lot, but in my professional journey, I learned a lot about the IT world with the Cisco, with AT&T, communications, computing, cloud, software-defined networking, all those things. But at the beginning of my journey was actually systems theory and control theory. So now the opportunity to bring all the learning from the IT to the OT space, the operational space, that touches the ground, that touches the machines, the automotive, the cars, the robots, has been very motivating for me. And so my really red thread is that kind of sharing of cultures and sharing of technologies between these two worlds, from which I believe one of the great values of this digital transformation comes from.
Clearly, and also why you are literally the having the right skills at the right place in the right time, given we still talk about OT-IT convergence, but we're probably much closer to it than we ever have been before. And certainly fog computing, or edge computing as others will call it, is a paradigm that well describes that. Let's go back to some of your early career. So you got a Ph.D. at Cornell, 10 years at Bell Labs, so a typical underachiever start there. But you jumped into back-to-back networking startups, and this was, of course, in the absolute heyday of networking. And interestingly enough, both were acquired, the latter by Cisco, which does explain how you ended up there. But what were some of your early wins and lessons learned during this time?
Well, that was a very rich time in Silicon Valley. It was the time of the big boom, the networking and the internet explosion. And I was coming from Bell Labs networking, ATM. The technology was ATM, and there was a chance to apply it to enterprise worlds rather than telco worlds. And so I felt that Silicon Valley was the place for this. And because they were becoming interested in the same technologies that AT&T had been pushing for a while. So getting in there, it was really the dynamics of small companies, very quick, sometimes quick and dirty prototypes, small little things that would really compete very well with very heavy duty designs from large companies like AT&T. And so the agility was one of the things that I learned. And then it was the explosion of the enterprise world and the beginning of data centers and clouds, in which I found myself in the middle. And in fact, it was the convergence of the IP networking and the telco networking that was happening at that time. And so we were at the forefront of that with Sonnet coming in together with the IP networking that Cisco was pushing. So there was the big explosion of networking, and it was fun to be with new people, also coming from very different backgrounds, sometimes computer design, large chip design, and software. So it was created great friendships, some of which were taken into the next journey. In fact, some of the people I met early, Chandra and Kanan and others, were with me in these early startups, creating the network of people that trust each other, that walk through multiple startups in their professional life. And this is what's happening here. So the networking, the humanity, the convergence of so many cultures was great. And then also the money at the end of the journey, because it was really high time for acquisitions. And you felt at this point that the world was yours, and there was no downside of it. You know, retirement was near, and then you realize that things are not always shiny. And then came the 2001 crash and so forth. So ups and downs of life and history and professional lives as well.
And Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley, exactly.
Yeah. And you talk about a company that did acquisitions extremely well, but also at a high velocity, you know, Cisco in the day. And of course, they acquired your latter startup. So you spent 14 years there as a distinguished engineer and later fellow. And I think at the time I met you, VP and head of advanced architecture and research. And what a great time to be there with Mr. Chambers and the Internet of Everything. And of course, you know, the black boxes that really defined very much the Internet for many of us. So what were some of the highlights of your time there?
Well, the company was really, really full of energy and enthusiasm, and winning in everything they were doing, but also was bringing together talents and organization, innovation in many ways, and it was great because also it could offer you multiple areas of growth. The first was the big routers, internet routers, GSR, CRS, the beginning of the big designs there. Then I moved to the data center and storage with Mario and Luca and the famous MPLS group. They were doing enterprise networking, and then the beginning of data center networking and data center computing. So there was this the first kind of the WAN and then the LAN with very different dimension, costs, and ways of doing things, and then again trying to bring both together, because from the big routers and the switches, routers and switches became again a convergence point. And so that is where I always live, at the at the boundary between domains. So that was very good. And under Mario and Luca, there was a lot of openness to do new things. And I really created this applied research group under Tom Etzel at that point. And it was amazing because we were acquiring companies into that organization, as well as starting to work with research, Stanford, San Diego, UC San Diego. And there was a time when I had these top networking professors coming in on Friday for these brainstorming sessions. You know, the Nick McCune, the father of software-defined networking, Scott Schenker, George Varghese, Balaji Prabhakar. These are big names in network research, and we were trying to put them into silicon and into real products. So it was like applied research, but going into concrete products directly. It was really great fun. And that group became the core of the advanced architecture and research team that was basically created around my 15 people there. And it became 30 people or more with good funding. And that was the greatest fun because we could give money to universities and then to startups, do prototyping, proof of concepts. And we touched all the new trends happening in technology at the forefront of cloud, at the forefront of software-defined networking, and the way to do security, deep packet inspection. And then came the early ideas of Internet of Things, industrial Internet, with connected vehicle efforts, which was fantastic. Going to Formula One races with McLaren, talking about the future of the automotive, which is in fact happening now, was great fun because it was the convergence of my passion for the car. That was a mechanical object at the time, becoming an electronic object. And so electronics and automotive were coming together. Again, another boundary, another transition, and much fun. And so that was what really brought the idea of fog computing to the fore, because we realized this car needs a lot of computing inside and outside. And the networking inside the car is changing, and it goes towards Ethernet. Ethernet wins everywhere. And then there's the cellular connectivity, or the wireless car to infrastructure. So those were fantastic early movements that preluded to all we saw in the industrial internet. That was 2010 or so. And we realized we need a new way of computing, which we are learning from the cloud, but at the edge. And that is when we started the stories of fog computing.
And I believe you are officially credited with having actually coined that term. And I believe you told me this story once, and it had something to do with the Monterey Aquarium, as I remember it. But the end result is, I believe the license plate on your Maserati says Cisco Fog, if I'm not
yes,
if I'm not
let me correct you a little bit here, because
please.
It was at the Monterey Research Center in Moss Landing. But so I gave a talk, and the talk was talking about extracting data from the bottom of the ocean, maybe processing in those robots at the bottom of the ocean, and bringing it up to the data centers. And there was a lady that was at Cisco before, the wife of one of my employees in that organization. When we finished outside, and I have the picture of that day, 2010, she said, Flavio, stop talking about cloud computing. You should call it fog computing. And because it's close to the ground. It's like clouds down to the ground. So she told me that, and I complained, come on, Ginny, I didn't believe it. Then I got on my Maserati that still didn't have that number plate on. And I thought, Ginny is right. So let's try to use this. And then I kind of became the user of the name, but the origin was her, Jeannie.
Okay.
And then when I left Cisco, my team gave me the vanity plate with the Cisco fog on, and until fog started dissipating into edge. But that was fun. That was fun because people enjoyed also the understanding technology through this silly naming, and wines also, grapes and other stuff. Talk about, the smiling about this. It was fun.
Yes. Absolutely brilliant name. I still think it's as applicable as Edge, but the industry certainly seems to like the Edge connotation there. And speaking of fog computing, which I think is actually still a very good term, although the industry seems to have adopted edge computing a lot. In 2015, you founded Nebbiolo, of course, a great grape name, but also representative of Italian fog per se, a Silicon Valley startup delivering the first complete fog edge computing software platform for the industrial automation market. And this one warms my heart because I do remember some of our early discussions, both in the basement of your home, testing some of the hypotheses of this, but of course, also enjoying your great espressos and cappuccinos. What compelled you to start this company and to focus on the industrial automation space?
Well, first, I believe that this was a future trend of notice, of relevance for the movement into industrial IoT. So I was very convinced that this was a big trend. And I didn't see much happening. In fact, even at Cisco, after we proposed it, and then outside, I waited a year or so trying other things before getting the courage to start the company around this topic. So it took a while to gather the courage to do it, because it implied a complete system, software, hardware, platform, infrastructure, which were not things very fashionable in the VC space at that time. So it took me a while to decide to do it. But then, since nobody was doing it, I decided, let's do it. And that is when we collected the people and started talking to investors. Mostly investors in Europe, because again, here the receptivity was not there, and so that was exciting, because starting something from the ground up with your old friends that you recall back to action with you. All the things that you need to do to start a company. It's learning every day, and it's even scary at some point, because there's nothing that you have done before that is exactly helping you. So you have to really learn and be flexible, be agile, and fearless in many ways. And in fact, fearless is the word. It's good that you don't know how hard it is to start a startup. Otherwise, you would never start. At the same time, if you knew how sometimes, building a family is not just the first moment of love and, infatuation, you would not sometimes build families. But then in the end, the growth and the experience is priceless. So I started with that courage, knowing that this was the right thing for the future, and seeing no movement in the area. So I decided, let's do it, and we got into this. But again, what I said is the funding had to come from Europe, because they were more open to an investment of this type that included, at that point, hardware, infrastructure, software, and even some elements of applications. It was a very broad initiative, that would have been much more appropriate for larger companies than startups. And probably you haven't told me that, in your wisdom, classifying what I was trying to do as maybe too broad or too ambitious. But anyway, we did it. We got into this, and
clearly a full stack is the way I'd like to refer to it. And it's interesting. You really were a pioneer in a early space at that time, at a pretty nascent time. I mean, fast forward now, and you would think these types of investments are much easier because both strategic investors and institutional investors are more used to thinking about things. But you were really at a formative time, my friend. So.
Good and bad.
What were some of the key use cases and wins for you at Nebbiolo?
So first, as I said before, the use case that I had in mind was more related to transportation than industrial. I had the car in mind, and other use cases like smart cities related to transportation, energy. Industrial was one step removed, but I learned of the potential of fog and edge for industrial from Kino Shita, Kino that became from Japan, an investor from Japan and former Cisco person, because he told me this is very important for industrial. So I knew there were applicabilities there, but it was not the first objective. Then, when the money came from TT Tech and KUKA, that was also a very exciting time because TT Tech, Georg Kopetz, brought in KUKA as the other partner for this adventure. And KUKA was very at the top of robotics at that time. Till Reuter was a very, charismatic CEO. So we met in Kitzbühel as the downhill races were taking place. So from the Audi rented building, we were looking at the big downhill races going on and talking about this new Nebbiolo company. And it was fun. And the idea was to apply it to one vertical first, to be focused at least on the vertical, target vertical, which was industrial automation. At that time, the beginning of Industry 4.0 was the talk, and it was exciting. And it was important for me to kind of put this kind of focus on what could fog and edge computing do in industrial automation. It was early 2015, again, pretty early in the picture, but the ideas came very clearly, and they are still valid, and they're still being pursued. And in fact, they are really the future in terms of one of the perspectives of digital transformation for the industrial. So that's what brought us to industrial automation. It was the investors coming from that space, and I think it was not wrong. And it's still, we'll talk about the difficulties of that domain, but I think it was a good direction.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, as we fast forward from 2015 to just recently, you actually exited the company to TT Tech, which I think was a nice home long term for this. Now that you're able to kind of sit back and think about child rearing of your own startup in some sense, what were some of the lessons learned now that you've gone everywhere from doing the startup to a full exit in this? I.e., what would you have done differently, if you don't mind me asking it that way?
Well, first, I think it was a very good focus to take, and it was important to take the time to really learn the pain points of the industry with people in that space. And it became very clear from the beginning that there was so much we could really do in this convergence of technologies because despite the colors and flashy robots and so on, the electronic infrastructure side of industrial automation was very much in need of innovation. And so that was really very important that the use cases became clear from the beginning, from the consolidation of these industrial PCs to the analytics at the edge and to this evolution of the automatic control of industrial automation. So the use cases became very clear, and that was one of the important learnings that is still there, that is still to be fully manifested, the potential that is there. On the other hand, the other learning is that this world was so distant from the IT world. The gap was so broad, in a sense, attractive because there's a vacuum there to fill. But on the other hand, there's a cultural shift that is dramatic for people involved. And so it became very clear that it was not an immediate adoption. It was actually painful because this world is conservative and wants to test things. And so that was the learning of the purgatory of IoT, that is the proof of concept pilot time, where you run around spending your equity money to travel, to teach, and to show a platform at work that maybe is not fully mature, so it cannot be really deployed at scale, so it cannot really bring in the revenue. So that process of learning from each other was very good, but is also costly, because when you really have to show as a startup that you have revenue, then you realize that it's a longer pole. It's a bigger challenge. So the challenge is to make money out of this transition and these new technologies for a startup is not easy. And when you come down to that bottom line, that was painful. But still, we made important breakthroughs with companies like Hyundai, or Hyundai, as they say here, and the Toshiba Group, and various other big names. And with Audi, we had fantastic proof of concepts that are still now, references. So we did an amazing job in breaking through the market as a little company, but it was not easy, and it's not easy for startups in this domain. And we see that then the pandemic came as well to make things harder. So the learning is this is a very good topic that will continue to mature and explode, I think. So it's a good area. On the other hand, it took a longer time to mature than we expected. Although it is a fast transition, if you think about it, 5 years is not long for this vertical. And in fact, so much acceptance is really appearing, is really there. And it's really a revolution. So it's too slow for a startup in some ways, but it's fast for that industry. So we're still there.
Yeah, well said, Flavio. And I go back to your intersection of IT and OT. You've sat at enterprise IT on the Cisco side and other companies, and certainly on the OT side for the last, I'll call it enterprise OT side for the last several years. And that is the part that I think most IT vendors, analysts, and that community try to judge progress on the OT side by what they've seen on the IT side, i.e. virtualization of IT over the last decade or two, right? So OT should virtualize just as quickly. And I think the old adage always applies, because I've lived on both sides, is a bug in software on the IT side, and people are inconvenienced. A bug in software on the OT side, and people are harmed or worse, right? And so
Yep.
it's that understanding and appreciation of that any startup that's working in this IT/OT kind of convergence space, we're always very much cautioning about and making sure, as you say, you have early revenue opportunities that can grow and scale into long-term ones. And so, yeah, you have lived that in spades, my friend.
Yeah, I know. I have a lot of scars on my back, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, given your early predictions of fog computing, I mean, what do you see as the next decade for this edge fog pattern that you predicted so early, especially in the digital industry space?
Yes, so I think I'm very confident and convinced that what we saw, and this is my problem. My wife also tells me, you see the future 100% right, but you don't know when the future will come. And so the timing is the question, but the direction is very clear. And so I'm very comfortable to predict now that what we talked about is really what is progressively happening. That is, virtualization will come into the OT space in its definition that is more mission critical than probably is typical of IT. And that will open the door to a new software deployment model, managed, containerized, based on virtualization, what they called cloud native. So we will have a model of distribution of software that goes now from the inner machine embedded to the edge to the cloud. So you can take the same function and move it wherever you want. So this is really distributed computing at its best. This continuum is happening, enabled by virtualization that has to be very lightweight and mission critical as you go down. That will kind of decouple and is decoupling the software and hardware. In the old world, you would buy a box to deploy an application. And now and then you have a fragmentation of boxes around the floors that is very difficult to manage, secure, upgrade, and so forth. So now there's an infrastructure like in the cloud, and there's applications that can go over the infrastructure. And now it becomes a world of apps, the app store of industrial. So now we are seeing the same things that happened with the phone, and that will unleash great innovation, very dynamic and agile, because you don't need to put down a box to test a new analytics algorithm. You can give a container to the operator and say, test it out. And the guy clicks and brings it down. And this leads also to, all these edge AI, ML, and digital twins. This is one of the exciting things of the future. Can also be distributed from the edge up. So you can have this hierarchical machine learning and digital twins and analytics that will, again, make sense of the data. And next goes into action, because extracting insight from the data is good, but you have to also close the loop. And this leads to the important area of the evolution of control. And this has been really my passion, seeing control becoming software defined. For example, the PLC becoming a software virtual PLC. That is a big, disruptive and dramatic change. So software-defined control will become, again, deployed as applications. What do you need a new robotic controller? Okay, I'll give you the container that does it instead of the box and the whole thing. But obviously, the infrastructure has to be ready for that. So now you have this continuum of software models and intelligence from the cloud all the way down. And that's the dream of IT and OT convergence. And it's coming. There's a beautiful, and I don't know if you have seen it, there's a beautiful video by Henning Loser of Audi that I probably didn't share with you, but I'll share it with you. It's not public, but he's really presenting the future of the automotive factory exactly in these terms. And it's nice to see it because we talked to Audi early about this vision, and now is what they're going for. So this is happening. And there's a lot of work to do still, but that's why we're here, and we are excited about more work ahead of us on this.
Well, and actually that begs the obvious question. So now with Nebbiolo safely tucked away with TT Tech, what's next for Flavio?
Well, the dream has not been completely manifested. The dream we started with in 2015, the fog dream, is maturing, but is not fully manifested. That's why I'm active with Lynx software, which, by the way, hosted Nebbiolo in 2015 for 6 months because we wanted to use their mission-critical defense typical embedded hypervisor, unique, that can be certified for safety, is very, very secure. So that's why we went to Lynx in the beginning. That's why I'm still working as an advisor to the board of Lynx, because we need that layer to close this gap towards the edge. Virtualization to the deep edge, to the first mile or last mile, requires mission-critical qualities. Lightness, coming from an embedded type of use into edge. So embedded going to edge is that area of activity that I'm involved in now, that we wanted to achieve with Nebbiolo, but then it was too much to try to attack that area, the real deep mission critical virtualization. And so I'm doing it with Lynx and other companies that are kind of working towards this. And to really manifest, like with CodeSys, manifest the virtualization of control. And we see that is feasible. And Intel also is moving in the same direction. So I am more at the last mile, still working in the same direction, helping companies in a consulting fashion. You teach that's a good area, and you succeeded in that. And we are all looking at the great things you did at Momenta in that direction. So I'm active on that front with a number of companies. I see big areas still open, which is the programming of this cyber physical system, of these IoT, industrial IoT systems. It's still an open question. So we are working on the infrastructure. The infrastructure is coming, but then how do we really enable an explosive deployment of applications? You really need a way to program these applications, build these applications. And I think that software has to evolve, software that really responds to the needs of mission-critical systems, cyber-physical system, the automotive autonomy, the robotics, the very control, and all that. That space is still fragmented. So beyond the infrastructure is the infrastructure for the software that can still make progress. And I'm active in that area. You'll probably hear from me in that space soon. And so I'm open and excited because I see the directions going, the industry going in the right direction, with more enthusiasm now that we come out of this difficult year or 2 years. So hope is coming back for everybody, and for me too as a technologist. So courage, investment. Also, there's this government investment in infrastructure that should give a lot more to areas like transportation, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, robotics, autonomous vehicles, and so on. So I think that there's a lot to do ahead, and I'm excited, open. We'll see.
Yep.
We'll keep in
fully
touch.
agreed. And again, you are clearly somebody with the right experience base at the right time and perhaps in the right place. And I love this idea of software-defined control. I think we could do a separate podcast just on that. But unfortunately, we are running really short on time. So, look, Flavio, thank you for spending this time with us today.
It was fun. I am very fond of you and for what you're doing, and this time was inspiring. I hope that the audience also got something out of our chat here. Thank you for the good questions, and best wishes to everybody in this new resurrection of the world.
Well said there, Flavio, and the feelings are mutual. So this has been Dr. Flavio Bonomi, founder and former CEO and CTO of Nebbiolo Technologies, and if I can get away with it, AKA the Fogman. So thank you for listening, and please join us next week for the next episode of our Digital Industry Leadership Series. Thank you and have a great day. You've been listening to the Momenta Digital Industry Leadership Podcast, produced by, for, and about digital industry leaders. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion, and as always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Please check our website at momenta.one for archived versions of podcasts and webinars, as well as resources to help with your digital industry journey. Thank you for listening.